Can you beat Pokemon Fire Red with only Fire-type Pokemon? Today, that's the question that I'm going to answer. Now, you might be thinking, of course you can, that's easy. But I'm here to tell you, this challenge is insane. I encountered roadblock after roadblock while trying to pull this off. There was just a few rules for this challenge. I was only allowed to send Fire-type Pokemon out into battle. I would be allowed to catch other types of Pokemon, but only for HM purposes. Secondly, no trading would be allowed. All Pokemon had to be caught in-game. And lastly, I would not be allowed to have more than one of the same kind of Pokemon on my team. To start the challenge, I chose my character and went to get my first Pokemon, Charmander. I actually haven't played Fire Red since I was a kid, so the nostalgia was hitting me really hard. I named the Charmander Bix, and started up my first battle against Gary. I wasn't too worried about these early game battles, since most of what all the Pokemon know are Growl and Scratch at the beginning. And after a few scratches, I had won my first battle of the run. There's a lot of things about Fire Red that make it much harder than modern Pokemon games. For instance, all TMs can only be used once, ever. Also, it has an Elite Four that's so difficult, it makes the newer games feel like they're for babies. Not to mention, there's a few points in the game where I had no idea where I was supposed to be going. Honestly, I'm surprised I even beat this game as a kid. And all of this on top of only using fire Pokemon would make this challenge insane. Luckily for me, most of the Pokemon in the early game were either grass or bug type, which meant my Charmander could one-shot many of them with Ember. Since Charmander was the only Pokemon I could catch at this point in the game, he was leveling up like crazy. And soon he learned Metal Claw. This girl wanted to know what kind of a trainer I was, so I told her I was Flame Wild. But that was enough messing around, it was time to get down to business. Brock's gym was up first, which meant I'd be going up against Rock-type Pokemon. Not a favorable matchup for me, but I figured that the first gym would be the best to get by at a disadvantage, since all the Pokemon would still be at a relatively low level. And thankfully I had Metal Claw, which was super effective against Rock-type. I took Geodude down without any problem. But then Brock sent out his Onix, which did much more damage to Charmander than I expected with his Rock Tomb. And I ended up taking my first loss of the run, but I wasn't ready to give up. I just needed to level up a little bit more to take on the Onix. So I started killing every Pokemon in my path as I made my way back down Viridian Forest. In no time, Bix had made it to level 16 and was now evolving. I guess that's what happens when you play through the game with only a single Pokemon. Now I felt much more prepared for my rematch with Brock, but there was something I needed to do first. It was time to fight Gary once again. Thankfully, his Squirtle hadn't learned Water Gun yet, so I was able to take it out with scratches, and one lucky critical hit. It was back to Brock, and his Rock Tombs were still doing quite a bit of damage, but luckily I had stocked up on some potions. Onix ended up using Tackle twice in a row, which left an opening for me to take him out with Metal Claw. With that, I had defeated the first gym of the run, and obtained the Boulder Badge. These fine gentlemen taught Bix Mega Punch, and it was time to see if Gary had gotten any better. Bix was quite a few levels above all of Gary's Pokemon at this point, and was able to take out his Pidgeotto very quickly. The only Pokemon I was worried about was this Squirtle, but thankfully I could use that Mega Punch that I had just learned. And somehow I landed a critical hit and almost one-shotted him. With a simple scratch that outsped him, I was able to close out the rest of his Pokemon super easy. I knew I was going to need to get all the experience I could to take on Misty's Water-type Pokemon with only Charmeleon. So I started fighting all the trainers I could around Cerulean City. Because Bix was such high level, I started to become a little overly confident. And during this trainer fight, when the Nidorann's Poison Point poisoned me, I actually ended up losing again for the second time on this run. But I quickly went back and beat her, as well as all the other trainers around the area. It was getting to be time that I needed an HM Pokemon, so I decided to catch a Spearow to trade with a little girl to get a Farfetch'd that could later learn Cut and Fly. I wouldn't be able to use it in battle, but it would be important for traversing the world. Next, I fought a trainer that had a Pokemon that reminded me of what I had to look forward to. Man, I couldn't wait to get a Vulpix on my team. but for now it was time to take on Misty's water-type Pokemon. Theoretically, this should have been the hardest gym in the challenge for me, since there was still no other fire-type Pokemon up until this point in the game that I could catch. But at level 33 already, Bix was looking unstoppable. He took out Staryu immediately, and Mega Punch was dealing crazy damage on Starmie as well. Bix took a water pulse like a champ, and was able to clutch out the win. With Misty defeated, I now had 2 of the toughest badges under my belt. Okay, I want to appreciate something for a second. You know how in every video game ever, you can just barge into somebody's house unannounced, and none of the NPCs care at all? Well, this old man actually reacted to my intrusion, and called me an insolent pup and a rude child with no courtesy. He's probably the only guy in all of Pokemon that does this, but still, I was impressed. It was time to fight Gary again, and I kicked his butt. Bix was just too OP, he wouldn't let any of Gary's Pokemon even throw out a hit. It makes you wonder if playing through the whole game with just a single Pokemon is actually the optimal way. That's pretty much what I did when I first played through Sapphire as a little kid, because I didn't know how to switch Pokemon at the PC. Okay, this is another totally hilarious interaction that I had completely forgotten about. This captain is feeling seasick, and for some reason, rubbing his back cures him of seasickness. And not only that, but if our character is actually 10 years old like Ash is in the anime, then that means this little kid is just rubbing this random old man's back. It's just kind of bizarre and hilarious to me, and if you check in the garbage can, you can actually look at this man's puke. After receiving cut from the captain, I continued battling all the rest of the trainers on the boat. And by the end, Charmeleon was already evolving. I couldn't believe how fast he had already leveled up. And he also learned Wing Attack. With Cut, I could now get to Surge's electric-type gym. I wasn't worried about the matchup, but I was curious to see how many Pokemon he would have. It turns out he has 3, but with Bix now at level 37, and with Flamethrower, I was able to clean sweep his team, one-shotting every single one of his Pokemon, to secure myself the 3rd badge. Next up has to be the worst area in the game, not in terms of difficulty, but just the most tedious and annoying location in the game, the Rock Tunnel. It's just this enormous cave with tons of trainers, and if you don't have Flash, which I didn't, then it's pitch black. Plus, like all the caves in the old Pokemon games, you run into Pokemon every 5 seconds. I am so sick of Geodudes. So I explored this cave for over an hour trying to find the exit, and I just could not find it. Eventually I just got really frustrated and used an escape rope to get out and go get Flash. So I talked to this guy, got Flash, and went back. It turns out this girl right here that you saw me fighting earlier was right next to the exit. If I would have just kept exploring that area more, I would have gotten out without Flash. But oh well, at least I had made it to Lavender Town. I seem to recall this fenced off grass patch from my time playing as a kid, and I had a suspicion a very important Pokemon could be in here. Growlithe! I knew it! I was so excited to find another fire-type Pokemon. I love battling with Charizard, but after playing through this much of the game with only Charizard, I was ready for a new team member. So I threw a Great Ball and waited anxiously. I caught him, and I decided to name him Roxas. Next I went to the Ghost Tower, which brought up the age-old question, do Pokemon just faint or can they actually die? Apparently they can die. And then after that shocking revelation, Gary says this to me. Is your Pokemon dead? Hey, it's alive. I can at least make them faint. Let's go! That's pretty messed up, Gary. I really think you need to get in to see a child therapist. So anyways, Roxas is only level 15 at this point. He won't be much use against Gary's Pokemon, so I decide to use the quick switch out trick to give him some XP while Charizard battles. And for the first time ever, Gary's Wartortle actually lands some water guns on me. I kept trying to use Mega Punch, but somehow it kept missing every single time. I was getting horrible luck, and I really needed to take this Wartortle down if I wanted to win the battle. I got him to very low HP with Metal Claw, but then he finished off Charizard with a water gun. I sent out Roxas and went for Bite, but sadly Wartortle outsped me and I lost. I quickly went back for the rematch, and a quick Mega Punch and Wing Attack was enough to take down the Wartortle. For the rest of the battle, I continued using the quick switch out XP trick with Roxas, and Bix was able to take out the rest of the Pokemon no problem. Next, I made my way to Celadon City and started doing a little exploring. I climbed to the top of this skyscraper and found something very important. A free Eevee! While I couldn't use the Eevee in battle right now, with a simple evolution, he would be able to join my team. Thankfully, the department store nearby carried Firestones, so I gave my Eevee, who I had named Fox, a Firestone, and it began to evolve. Suddenly, I had gone from just one team member to 3 in a very short time span. But I wasn't done there. I also was going to use a Firestone on Roxas to evolve him into Arcanine, one of my favorite Pokemon of all time. And while I was at it, I decided to teach Arcanine Aerial Ace as well. Now it was time to help the Game Corner out with its pest problem. Roxas was now up to level 24, and with Bite and Ember he was actually able to hold his own in most battles. I went on to clear out all the Team Rocket grunts from their secret underground hideout. And at last it was time to take on the Team Rocket boss, Giovanni. At this point Fox was poisoned, so I quickly switched over to Roxas. With just a couple of bites I was able to almost finish off the Onix. And then once I was able to throw out an Aerial Ace, I finished him off. Next up was Rhyhorn, who I always forget is not weak to fire attacks, but he still was no match for Roxas. Roxas leveled up to 30, and now it was time to take on Giovanni's last Pokemon, Kangaskhan. Roxas was taking some heavy hits, but thankfully when I used Ember, Kangaskhan got burned. And again, I got a bit lucky when Kangaskhan decided on his next move to use Tail Whip, and I was able to close out the game with just Roxas. So another bizarre and hilarious moment I definitely don't remember from when I was a kid is this creepy old man peeping through the window of the Celadon City gym, who says, "Heh, this gym is great. It's full of women." Like what? How did this get in the game? Erica had grass-type Pokemon, so going up against her with a fire team kind of made me feel like Azula going up against those volleyball kids.
Yes! We defeated you for all time! You will never rise from the ashes of your shame and humiliation! That was fun.
Then I found out in the Game Corner prize desk you can actually buy Flamethrower. You know what that means, time to fuel my inner childhood gambling addiction. And after a while of playing, I actually did hit a jackpot. But sadly, it wasn't enough to buy Flamethrower just yet, so I would have to come back for it. So I went and got Fly, and battled trainers until I made my way to Fuchsia City, where I would have to navigate the Safari Zone until I found the secret house that contains Surf, which also meant I need to find a Pokemon that could use it. I went over to the Poison-type gym and battled this guy who said Master Koga comes from a long line of ninjas. Wait a minute. But anyways, it was time to take on Koga. Right off the bat, Fox was doing pretty well. He could have taken out the Coughing if it wasn't for Koga pulling out a Hyper Potion. Fox quickly got Coughing down to low HP again, but this time died in the process. I sent out Roxas, who was able to quickly finish off the Coughing. The Muck, on the other hand, had much higher defense and HP stats. I felt like I was just slowly chipping away at his huge health bar. And once Roxas was poisoned from Sludge, things started going downhill. I missed an attack, and Roxas ended up fainting. Charizard was the only one left to finish off these last 3 Pokemon. Thankfully, he was able to take out the Coughing with a single Flamethrower. He began doing good with the Wheezing as well, taking him down to very low HP, but again Koga pulled out a Hyper Potion. It didn't end up mattering though because Charizard was able to finish him off with a Wing Attack and Flamethrower. I went back to the Safari Zone to find a Pokemon that could learn Surf, as well as all the other HMs that Farfetch'd was not able to learn. And it turns out that Psyduck is the perfect candidate. Now that I had a lot of money, I made my way back to the Game Corner, where I got enough coins to buy Flamethrower. Fox was in most desperate need of a good fire move, so I decided to teach it to him. I could finally get into the Silph Co building and take on all the Team Rocket grunts in Saffron City. But it was during this time that I started to wonder why I hadn't found any more fire-type Pokemon yet in the run. The only real research I had done beforehand was a quick glance at the Kanto Pokedex to see what fire-type Pokemon there were in the region. So I dug a little deeper only to find out that Vulpix, Ninetales, and Magmar are all Leaf Green exclusives. You know, for a game called Fire Red, you are severely lacking in fire-type Pokemon. But that would be okay because there were a couple more I'd be able to catch later on. It was time for a rematch with Giovanni. This time, Fox was the star of the show. With Flamethrower, he had become a lot more powerful. And at level 44, he was able to take on every single one of Giovanni's Pokemon by himself. Next, it was time to take on Sabrina, the Psychic Gym Leader. Lucky for me, Roxas and Fox both had Bite, a Dark-type move that was super effective against Psychic Pokemon. It was dealing massive damage, and despite Sabrina's best efforts to keep her Pokemon alive with Hyper Potions, Roxas was taking them out no problem. Even when she sent out Venomoth, who's not actually Psychic type, Roxas still had super effective moves to deal with her. Once Alakazam was the only Pokemon left, I switched in Fox. Her Alakazam was powerful and was doing a lot of damage with Psychic, but the bites were just too much and I won. I fought some more trainers and made my way to Cinnabar Island, where it was time to face Blaine. Finally, an opponent that appreciated fire Pokemon as much as I did. His first couple Pokemon were quite easy to take out, with Roxas. With a few bites, I was able to finish off Growlithe and Ponyta. Rapidash was able to tank a few more hits than those two, and he did get some attacks off on Roxas. But ultimately, I stuck to the bites and was able to finish Rapidash off. Blaine's final Pokemon was an Arcanine that was the same level as Roxas. After being intimidated, I switched Roxas out for Bix. Bix was faster but was taking more damage than Arcanine. I started using Mega Punch, but it looked like Charizard was going to die first. When Arcanine had a sliver of health left, he used Takedown, which killed Bix, but also himself with recoil damage. With victory secured, I made my way over to the 3 islands, where it was time to find my final team members. Rapidash should make a fine addition to my collection. I quickly decided that Roxas would be too powerful to deal damage, so I switched over to Fox. Quick Attack was currently my lowest damage move I had on any of my Pokemon, so my plan was to use Quick Attacks to get Rapidash down to low health. I threw some Ultra Balls, but Rapidash did not want to get caught. But I threw a second Ultra Ball and caught my 4th fire Pokemon of the run. I decided to name him Shredda. But before I progressed any further, it was time to catch one of the most important Pokemon of the whole run. The only legendary Pokemon I would actually be able to use, Moltres. I had been so excited for this moment throughout the entire run. Historically, in Pokemon games that had the 3 legendary birds in them, I had always played more with Articuno and Zapdos, so I was really looking forward to getting my hands on Moltres and fully utilizing him in this run. And since he was the only legendary I would need, I decided to use a Master Ball on him. I named him Dex and taught him Steel Wing, and then taught Shredda Fire Blast. That meant it was time to take on the final gym of the game, Giovanni's gym. And it was Moltres' time to shine. I sent Dex out and used Steel Wing, which is super effective against Rhyhorn. I took the first one out with just 2 hits, and the second one went down just as easily. But now it was time for Shredda to get a chance and test out that new Fire Blast attack. It did massive damage against Dugtrio and took him out in 1 hit. Next up was Nidoqueen, and I used Fire Blast against her as well. While it did do a lot of damage, ultimately Nidoqueen took out Shredda with an Earthquake. But Fox was able to quickly come back in and finish off Nidoqueen. Okay, I've got to say that Nidoking's sprite in Fire Red is probably my favorite of any Pokemon in this generation. I mean, he looks so sick. Why does he still not look like that in modern Pokemon games? But anyways, Giovanni was defeated for the last time and gave me Earthquake. So I taught Charizard Earthquake, but before going to the Elite Four, I needed to go back and get Flamethrower to teach to Shredda, and teach Roxas Overheat. As I made my way through Victory Road, I found Dragon Claw, which I would also teach to Charizard. I had made it to the Elite Four, and would only have 5 Fire-type Pokemon to beat them with. Lorelei was up first, and despite self-proclaiming herself as an Ice-type trainer, she had a lot of Water Pokemon with Water moves. And I have to admit, between all of the full restores and endless surfs, I kind of got destroyed. But I knew before I even started the run that the Elite Four was going to be the most difficult part. As I rematched her, I quickly realized that Dugong was going to be a major problem for my team. All of my non-fire moves like Bite with Roxas and Fox, and Dragon Claw with Charizard dealt very little damage to the Dugong, and even when I got it down to low health, she'd just whip out a full restore. The fact of the matter was, my team was getting obliterated by Silph, and there was nothing I could do about that. It took 4 of my Pokemon to take down her Dugong, and Lapras made quick work of the rest of my team. I knew I needed to mix things up in order to get the win, so this time I sent out Charizard first to deal with Dugong. Charizard was faster, and I got a bit lucky with Dugong using Hail and Safeguard instead of Silph right away. With a couple of Earthquakes and Dragon Claws, I was able to get Dugong down to low health before I died, even after she used a full restore. With a quick bite and extreme speed, Roxas was able to finish off the Dugong. One thing I came to realize during this run was that a lot of her Pokemon had a much stronger physical defense than special defense. What that meant for me was that my fire attacks, despite being weak against water, actually dealt more damage than most of my other moves. This realization was especially important against Lapras, who became much easier to deal with after I started using Flamethrower against her. It still took a few of my Pokemon, but when Dex landed a critical hit when using Flamethrower, I was feeling really excited. There was a chance that this could actually be the run. When she sent out Slowbro, I decided to revive Bix. Shredda got taken out right away, and unfortunately, Flamethrower was not nearly as effective against the Slowbro, so I continued reviving as many of my Pokemon as I could between hits. Dex was taken out by a Silph, but thankfully I now had Roxas, who knew Bite, which was super effective against Slowbro and made him flinch. This was it, I was on Lorelei's last Pokemon, Jinx. She put me to sleep right away, so I used the opportunity to revive a few of my Pokemon and use some potions. After a while of dealing with Attract and sleep, Roxas finally woke up and bit Jinx. With Jinx at so low health, I thought I really had her on the ropes now, until of course, she pulled out a full restore. Fox was able to get a couple of good bites off, before he also was put to sleep. I whipped out a full heal right away, only to get attracted by Jinx. This was such an obnoxious combination of moves to deal with, but I knew if I could just get one more bite off, I could win. And that's exactly what I did. I finished off Jinx and beat Lorelei. Well, that was one Elite Four member down, but I still had a ways to go. Bruno was up next with his fighting-type Pokemon. Bite turned out to be pretty effective when dealing with Onix, but Earthquake was super effective against my Pokemon. After Fox fainted, Roxas got Onix down to very low health. But of course he pulled out a full restore right before I could finish him off with extreme speed. But after a few more bites, Onix was down. Hitmonchan took out Roxas right away with a Sky Uppercut. But Bix came in swinging, getting a one-hit KO with a Wing Attack critical hit. And lucky for me, when Machamp came out, he used Scary Face and Bulk Up, which gave me the opportunity to yet again use a super effective Wing Attack that landed as a critical hit. You're not going to believe this, but when Hitmonlee came out, I landed a third critical hit with Wing Attack. Bix was on a roll today. And after using a bunch of Earthquakes on Onix, even after he used a full restore, I was able to finish off the last member of Bruno's team and move on. Agatha was up next, and apparently she used to have a thing for Professor Oak? That's interesting. Her first Pokemon was Gengar, and I wasn't too worried about this matchup because I had Bite, which was super effective against Ghost types. It did get me with Confuse Ray, but I was able to land a Bite and finish off the Gengar. Golbat was up next, and because I was confused, I ended up hitting myself. In just a couple of turns, the Golbat was able to take out Fox with Air Cutters. But now it was Shredda's time to shine with his newly learned Fire Blast attack. It was dealing fantastic damage, and I took out the Golbat in just 2 hits. Arbok came out next, and I landed a solid hit on him before I took some heavy damage myself from a Sludge Bomb. Shredda was so close to taking him out, but barely died, so I sent Roxas out next. I should have known by now that she'd pull out a full restore, but Roxas was up to the task, and after a quick extreme speed and overheat, I was able to finish off the Arbok. Her final Gengar and Haunter did put me to sleep a few times with Hypnosis, but it was nothing that my Pokemon couldn't handle. Wow, this battle was so much easier than Lorelei. That meant I had won my 3rd battle of the Elite Four. I was nervous going up against my next opponent though, Lance the Dragon type trainer. If you remember back to the old days of Pokemon, Dragon types were totally overpowered. Fairy type didn't exist, so they weren't weak to anything except other Dragon moves. Gyarados was up first and took Shredda out pretty quickly with a Hyper Beam. And then, just my luck, I got hit by another Hyper Beam that was a critical hit on Bix. How could this happen? I was doing so good on this run. Roxas wasn't going to go down without a fight though. And despite Lance pulling out the full restore right when I had him on the ropes, Roxas got exactly what I needed for the comeback, a critical hit with extreme speed. After a couple of aerial aces, he was dead, but I was not prepared for what was about to come next. Aerodactyl had Ancient Power, which is super effective against every single one of my Pokemon. Not to mention he was level 58, which was 4 levels above any of my Pokemon. He finished off Roxas and I sent Fox out, but Fox took heavy damage from Ancient Power. This was not looking good for me, even after all that I had been through to get to this point. I knew I still had a chance if I could land a Dragon Claw with Bix, but I was taken out immediately by Ancient Power. Dex was my last Pokemon and I went for a Steel Wing. But Aerodactyl used Hyper Beam, and it killed me in one hit with a critical hit! I had lost, but I knew that there was only one thing I could do. Grind out all of the trainers that I had missed along the way for experience, and use the V-Seeker to re-battle trainers like these girls. Not only do I get a decent amount of experience from beating their Pokemon, but they give out a ridiculous amount of prize money, which was exactly what I needed right now to get more Hyper Potions and Revives. After leveling up, it was time to fight Lance once again. This time I lost Roxas and Dex, both to Gyarados' Hyper Beam. But I sent out Bix next, and luckily his Flamethrower was able to burn the Gyarados. Gyarados had a recharge from Hyper Beam, and the burn finished him off. But just like last time, Aerodactyl was too fast for Bix, and one-shotted him with Ancient Power. Shredda, on the other hand, was actually able to tank a hit, but I forgot that fire moves are not very effective against Aerodactyl. Another one of my Pokemon was down, but I knew that if I could take out this Aerodactyl, I had a good chance of winning. I got a little lucky with Aerodactyl using Scary Face, and then flinching to a bite. This was getting close. Fox was so low HP, but Aerodactyl was as well. After reviving Roxas, Fox took a Hyper Beam and died. But then I sent out Roxas and was able to use Aerial Ace and then Extreme Speed to finally finish off the Aerodactyl. But there was no time to celebrate because Dragonite was coming up next. Roxas got taken out by Hyper Beam, which meant Bix was my only remaining Pokemon. I used Dragon Claw and then healed Charizard while Dragonite was recharging. Dragonite used Hyper Beam and I barely lived it. I used Dragon Claw again, but it barely wasn't enough, and he used a berry to heal. My only option was to heal Charizard with a Hyper Potion. I was able to live an Outrage, and then finished him off with Dragon Claw. There were a couple of Dragonairs left, but I was able to finish them off pretty easily with Hyper Potions and Dragon Claw. This was it, the final battle of the run against my rival, the champion, Gary. And there was one Pokemon I was scared to death to go up against. But first, I used Flamethrower with Dex to one-shot his Pidgeot. But now my day of reckoning had come. Blastoise was now fully powered with Hydro Pump, and it instantly became apparent that my Pokemon didn't stand a chance. Only Bix was able to outspeed him and get off an Earthquake, but his physical defense was way too good, and Hydro Pump almost killed Charizard. None of my attacks were doing much damage, and even when Blastoise missed his next Hydro Pump, he still was able to heal with a berry. Thankfully, I landed a critical hit with Dragon Claw, but Bix was gone and it felt like all hope was lost when he pulled out a full restore. The damage that Dex was able to deal was pathetic, and even more so once he started a Rain Dance. At level 63, his Blastoise was so much higher than all my Pokemon, and even after all of the blood, sweat, and tears it took to get here, I was out of revives. Blastoise hit me with one final Skull Bash, and I lost. After losing to Lorelei one more time, which I won't even bother showing, I finally made it back to Gary. He opted in to send out Rhydon as his second Pokemon this time around. Of course, he had Rock Tomb, which was able to one-shot Bix. Dex was able to pull off a Flamethrower, but it wasn't very effective, and then instantly met the same fate as Bix. This is not looking good for me. Thankfully, Shredder was finally able to finish him off with a Fire Blast, and I revived Charizard straight away. Blastoise missed his first Hydro Pump, so I was able to fully heal Charizard before Shredder was taken out. There was one thing I had learned since my previous failure against Blastoise. I couldn't beat Hydro Pump, but there was a chance that I could outlast it. You see, Hydro Pump was limited to only 5 PP. That meant if I could get him to use all of them, he would be forced to use other moves. So far, he had used 4 and set up a Rain Dance. I used Dragon Claw with Bix, which dealt decent damage, and then died to his final Hydro Pump. This was great. That meant that Blastoise had no more water moves that dealt damage. The bad news was Roxas was my last Pokemon alive, and I only had a few revives left. Apparently Gary and I had the same idea, because when our HP got down to red, we both healed up on the same turn. After a bunch of bites back and forth, we got down to low HP once again. I decided to play it safe and heal up Roxas. And thank goodness that I did, because immediately Blastoise landed a critical hit with Skull Bash. I tried to finish him off with an extreme speed, but he pulled out the full restore. The damage wasn't great, and I decided to revive Charizard before being taken out by Skull Bash. Once again, I was on my last Pokemon without a great way to deal damage. After many Dragon Claws, I healed Bix up, and with one final Dragon Claw, I was finally able to defeat his Blastoise. But he still had 3 more Pokemon. There was a bit of back and forth with Alakazam taking out my low health Pokemon and me reviving them, but with Bite and Extreme Speed, I was able to finish him off. Executor wasn't too bad because he was weak to fire. This was it. Arcanine was Gary's final Pokemon. Bix had Earthquake, which is super effective against Arcanine, but somehow still didn't deal very much damage. We went back and forth trading hits over and over. I healed Bix up, but Arcanine was getting ahead of me with extreme speed. If I made a single mistake, it could all be over in an instant. When we both got down to low health, the only thing I could do was revive Roxas. His Arcanine used 1 more extreme speed and finished off Bix. My only chance was to also use extreme speed and pray that Roxas was faster. And he was! I had defeated Gary, become champion, and finished Pokemon Fire Red with only Fire-type Pokemon. This video took an incredible amount of work to make, so if you could hit that subscribe button, it would make it all worth it. And check out my video on screen where I played through all of Scarlet and Violet with only shiny Pokemon. The link will also be in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching.